Hi, I'm just going to do a rundown now of the various features of my Redback Tricopter and why you might like to try one. Firstly, I've done my best to keep the costs down to a bare minimum. This is not going to be an expensive frame. It's quite cheap. It's not as tough as carbon fibre. Things will break on this more than they would if it was an all carbon fibre frame. But once you see the costings online, I think you'll be fine. You can buy, well, probably 3 of these frames for less than the cost of some of the better carbon fibre frames out there, and certainly the parts by part prices are exceptionally cheap. So, okay, so why do it as 3D printing, ABS? Well, several reasons. Firstly, easy, simple. It's very light. This, as you see it here, with a LiPo on it, ready to fly. Okay, admittedly it doesn't have the FPV gear on it yet, but that is 375 grams as a ready to fly airframe. Okay, I'm running 1806 motors on it, 2300 kVs, and it is running, this is set up with 6-inch props. Okay, it will run 6-inch props with the optional Mobius mount on the nose and clear the 6-inch props. No problems. Okay, you're not running Mobius mount, you've got all this deck up here, you can put your FPV gear on. Okay, one of the big advantages of ABS is it doesn't shield radio frequencies. So you don't have to worry about carbon fibre blocking signals, both on your video and your control. ABS also is self-damping, so you actually find this is less susceptible to vibrations than a carbon fibre and metal frame. Okay, parts cheap, parts are easy to make. It's 90% printed, the whole kit. Okay, it has some nice little features in it, including these cable management holes. There is a cable route section underneath. As I mentioned before, in the build videos and the fit out videos, there's an optional Mobius mount. There is an optional Naze mount plate. If you guys have any specific needs, desires, parts, or anything else you want made for it, drop me a line. I'm happy to explore any modifications you want. The mounts are made so they will take a 22 series motor as well as an 18 series motor. Although standard comes with the slots cut for M2 bolts. So if your motor needs M3 mounting hardware, let me know. Don't drill out these holes. It's not bad karma with printed stuff. Don't try and drill out these holes. Tell me you need M3 slots and I can make arms with M3 slots for you. Not a problem. Anything like that, just drop me a line. I'm willing to listen to any suggestions, modifications, etc, etc, etc. Now, why a tricopter, finally? Well, if you haven't flown a tricopter, well, if you're asking that question, you haven't flown a tricopter. They just rock. They are just so much better when it comes to turning in air. Why? Well, if you've got a quadcopter, to actually do yaw, you've got to change the thrust of the diagonal motors to force the yaw via the change in torque of the motors. Which means altitude changes, power to the motor changes. It's a lot more control line. The controller has to think a lot more to maintain it level and do the yaw. In a tricopter, yaw is controlled by varying the vectored thrust of, in this case, the tail motor. So to your left, the motor just pivots a little to the right and around you go. Motor speeds don't change. These front motors don't change. Their speed or their amount of thrust, anything like that. So when you yaw, it's just nicer. Now, like I said, if you have to ask why a tricopter, you haven't flown one. The other thing is you might have flown a bad one. There are a lot of bad tricopter designs out there. And the biggest issue I see with them is making this pivot work nicely. Firstly, it needs to be smooth, and you want a really nice range of motion on this rear pivot. And how most of the tricopters out there pivot the rear motor is they mount the servo at the end of the boom and connect the servo to some sort of seesaw mech or plate that the motor is sitting on. So the motor's relatively floppy, I suppose is the bad word, to start with, and it's pivoting on, in some cases directly, the servo drive shaft, which in a sub-micro servo isn't necessarily the strongest bit of gear in the world. I've stolen or borrowed the idea from a couple of different designs, and I've moved the pivot up into the frame. So the servo here is mounted under the pivot block, and a control arm means that the whole arm is pivoted. So it just means there's less free play. It's more accurate. There's no real... there's less stress on the drive shaft of the servo because the servo is just pivoting this. It's not also then holding the motor, part of the motor mount system, if you like. And it just, by moving the servo inside into the frame and just pivoting the whole boom, it just gives a more accurate and a smoother motion to the vector thrust, the vectored thrust on the tail. So there it is. If you check out the Facebook page, you'll see the pricing on the kits and the parts. There is also a Redback quadcopter available, but try a try. If you haven't tried a try, you haven't lived. Tricopters rock, but not all flight controllers can deal with them. And there are some bad ones out there that are giving tricopters a bad reputation, but try this.